Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Scripture Joe over here, and welcome back to episode 4 of this tutorial series, making you a new Roblox scripture fledgling. In Lua, there are 3 basic loops you want to know how to use. The first of the 3 is while loops. This loop runs the code inside of it repeatedly while a certain variable or comparison is true. So for example, you have a baby model in your game. And yes, I'm going to keep on using baby examples for this tutorial series. And while that baby is less than 3 months old, so we created the months variable over here and we set it to 0. While this baby is less than 3 months old, you want the computer to tell you that, hey, this baby is less than 3 months old. So you make a while loop and we open it using the while keyword. And after that, we make the computer check if the baby is less than 3 months old using the less than operator we learned about in the previous video. So while months is less than 3, then we want the computer to do something. So we use the do keyword to tell the computer what to do, and then we close the while loop using an end statement. So what do we want the computer to do? We want it to print the baby is less than 3 months old. Now if we run this, we will realize that a timeout error will occur. What that means is that the computer will keep on repeating the code inside the while loop while the comparison is true, which is the case. Months is less than 3, it is 0, right? So what that means is the computer will eventually burn out. Since the computer comparison is always true, since we never changed the months variable, this makes the computer run the code endlessly and very quickly, making it burn out. So let's run it and see what happens. So I don't recommend you to run it if you have a potato PC, right? It might crash. And even if you have a superb PC, it will freeze for a little bit. So let's run this, and if you don't want to, you can skip this part. So let's run this to see what happens. As you can see, the computer is freezing. And while it's freezing, we can admire the beautiful IDE we have before us, right? Roblox Studio, where all your dreams come true. You can make your fantasy games and everything you wish to make. You can make systems beyond your wildest dreams and games that attract new players and make them engaged with this platform. And also give you money, right? Which is a big plus. Now, as you can see, the computer finally unfroze. And we can see in the output interface, it's printed that there was a timeout. We exhausted the allowed execution time. And we can notice that before that happened, the baby is less than 3 months old was printed 4,996 times, which is pretty amazing. But it was pretty consuming of the PC, which made it burn out and tell you there's an error, I can't keep on doing this, right? So to fix this problem, we can use a function called wait. Now, what this function does is it gives the computer a break before running the code again. We'll put it inside the while loop, and notice if we run this, no error occurs, as you can see. But the computer still prints the baby is less than 3 months old pretty quickly and repeatedly. As you can see, the times printed is increasing pretty quickly, since that is what the while loop does. It repeats the code in it until the boolean it checks turns to false. So what the wait function does, right, is it tells the computer, hey, I want you to stop what you're doing and wait, just relax for a certain amount of time. Now, the wait function has an input that allows you to set the amount of time you want the computer to stop and do nothing for. So this input is in seconds. So if you put, it has to be a number. So if you put 1, this tells the computer, hey, I want you to wait 1 second before continuing, right? So it will wait 1 second and then go to the next line and then go back, check if months is less than 3, and then repeat the code. That's what happens. If the wait input is empty, that time waited is a fraction of a second. but we want to set it to 1, which is 1 second. You can change that input however you wish, depending on how long you want the computer to wait before repeating the statement. Now, we also learned that previously functions also have output, not only input. Now, the output of the wait function is the actual time waited for the computer. So if you told the computer to wait 1 second, it will try to wait as close as it can to 1 second. But the actual time waited might be for example, 0.999 second. The wait function returns that actual time as output if you want to use it. So let's assign that output to a variable named waited and print it out and see the actual time waited every time the computer waits supposedly 1 second. So let's run this and look at the results. So as you can see, the computer prints the baby is less than 3 months old, then waits 1 second and prints the actual time waited, and then it repeats the loop. Now let's say we want the while loop to stop repeating at a certain point. That point is when the baby is no longer less than 3 months, but actually more or equal to. So how do we do that? We can change the age of the baby in months while the loop is running. So we insert the line of code to increase the amount of months by 1 each time the loop repeats. To do this, we use the sign, equal sign, to assign months to what it is currently, which is basically months, plus 1. So this changes the months variable from what it was previously 0 to what it is currently. So it changes the months variable from what it is currently to what it is currently plus 1. So it is currently 0. It changes it to 0 plus 1, which is 1. If the months variable was 1, it changes it to 2. If the months variable was 5, it changes it to 6. Now a simpler way to do this is so instead of writing months twice, we can use months plus equals 1. What this does is it just adds 1 to its current value. So if months is 0, right? It adds 1 to it and it makes it 1. If months is 1, it makes it 2. If months is 5, it makes it 6, right? So let's run this and see what happens. So as you can see, before that, let's print the months variable to see how it changes while the loop is running. So as you can see, the computer prints the baby is less than 3 months old. It then waits 1 second, then changes months to, or adds 1 to the current value of months, and it changes it to 1. Then it repeats the loop. The baby is less than 3 months old, waits 1 second, changes it to 2. The baby is less than 3 months old, waits 1 second, changes it to 3. Now it does not repeat again. Why is that? Because the month's value reached 3. So once it checks the month's value when it wants to repeat the code, so it finishes all the code inside of it, then it goes back and it checks the months variable again and sees if it's less than 3. Since the months variable is 3 and it's not less than 3, the code fails to run again, and the while loop stops over here. So now let's comment out this loop and talk about the second of the 3 basic loops, which is the repeat loop. Similar to the while loop, the repeat loop runs the code inside of it limitlessly until the boolean it checks turns to false. The only difference between it and the while loop is that it checks the boolean after it runs the code. Meaning even if the boolean was false, the code will run at least once and then stop repeating. Let's use the same months variable as before while commenting out the previous while loop as we did. So to write a repeat loop, you start with the repeat statement. And then you type the code you want to run. And then you check the boolean or comparison using the until statement. It added it automatically after I pressed enter. So we want to run the code inside here until months is more than or equal to 3. So when this becomes true, the code stops inside the repeat statement, or the repeat loop stops repeating. So what do we want the code to repeat? We want the computer to print the baby is less than 3 months old. Now if you run this, the same thing as before will happen. The computer will crash or face an error, since we don't have a wait function that tells the computer to take a break. Right now it won't. So if we repeat this, so if we run this, the computer will keep on printing out the baby is less than 3 months old until months is more than or equals 3, which never happens. So if we want this to happen, we just set months plus equals 1. So each time the code runs, and let's wait for 1 second. Okay, each time the code runs, months increases by 1, and then the computer checks if months is more than or equal to 3. So if we do this, as you can see, the code runs only 3 times and then stops, since months reached 3. Now what if months was already 3? We said that the code will run at least once in a repeat statement regardless of the boolean, while the while statement checks the boolean first and then runs the code if it's true. Over here it runs the code in the repeat loop, it runs the code at least once before checking the boolean. So if we run this, even though months is already 3, the code runs at least once the computer prints the baby is less than 3 months old. So the last of the 3 basic loops, let's comment out the repeat loop. The last of the 3 basic loops is the for loop. This is useful when you want to repeat a set of code for a specific amount of times. The for loop is special as it creates a variable that can be used as a counter that changes according to the number of times the code has run inside the loop. For example, if this is the 7th time the code is running, the variable would be set to 7. To create a for loop, we start with the for statement, and then we instantiate or create or name our counter variable. In this case, we're gonna name it I, which is the default for a for loop if you don't have anything, any specific name you want to give it. So we name it I, then we set it to which number we want our for loop to start the loop. So if you want to start from 1, and then which number we want it to end at, let's say 3, and the increments to our starting number that happen until the counter reaches the target number, which is 3. So you separate them by commas. So the increments would be 1. So in this case, let's explain this. So in this case, we want our for loop to repeat its code according to a counter that starts at 1, ends at 3, and changes by 1 each time the code inside the loop runs. After setting the counter variable, we then add the do keyword to tell the computer what to do. And then we close the loop using an end statement. The loop runs whatever is between the do and end keywords a number of times, reflective of its counter variable. For this loop, we just want to print the counter variable every time the loop repeats itself. This is to see how the counter variable changes as the loop repeats. So if we run the game, let's run it. We can see that loop ran the code a total of 3 times. And it printed the counter, which is I, each time. It only stopped when the counter reached the target number, which is 3. So let's say we start the counter from 2 to 3. So this is the starting number, this is the end number, this is the increment. The amount of increases that happen to the counter each time it proceeds, it repeats. So if we print this, or run this, we will notice that only 2 and 3 were printed out. That's because we started from 2, and then I, or the counter variable, increased by 1, and it reached the target number, which was 3. And so it stopped repeating, the loop stopped repeating. Now, if the increment was something that does not apply, right? For example, you have a -1, and you're telling the computer, hey, I want you to start from 2 and go to 3, but with -1 increments. How does that happen? You can't decrease the number to reach a higher number, right? So 2 minus 1 becomes 1, and then 1 minus 1 becomes 0. It never reaches 3. So what happens then, if we run the code, we will notice that the code in the loop never runs, because that is illogical, all right? The computer just skips this loop. The same thing happens if we put an increment that is greater than the target number, right? So if we add 2 to 2, it becomes 4. It never becomes 3, right? So it prints it only once, when the counter variable starts at 2, and then it adds 2, it became 4, which is more than 3, so it stopped. It didn't reach the target number, right? So anything, if the counter is still the target number or less, the code still runs. If the increment is illogical, like -1, while the starting number is less than the target number, then the code doesn't run at all. Now, we talked about the 4 basic types of data in the first video of the series. There are, however, other more complex types of data, such as instances or objects. Each instance has its own function, has its own functions, properties, and events. Instances are like a new software you download on your computer. This software has its own tools and is useful in its own unique ways. It also has its own properties or settings you can change, which change certain aspects of it. We can consider the tools and settings you find on a software respectively similar to the functions and properties of an instance. What an instance looks like is everything you can add on the Explorer interface by pressing the plus button over here. So every one of these items is its own standalone instance, and each can be used differently. So each one has its different applications, it has its own properties, it has its own functions, right? It has its own events. So to create a new instance using a script, there's a function we use, which is instance.new. And then we open the input using the parentheses, and we type the name of the instance we want to create. For example, we want to create a part. This is how you create a new instance using script rather than using the plus button on the Explorer menu. Now, we will talk more about instances and their properties, functions, and events, which you probably never heard about, right, in this series, which you actually didn't hear about in the series. We'll talk more about them in the next video. I hope you enjoyed the learning experience, and if you want to continue, be sure to watch the next video. If you want to stop here, just save your progress by pressing File, Save to File, over here. And then name the file whatever you want and save it wherever you wish. Be sure to support the channel by giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or inquiries, feel free to ask in the comment section. Toodaloo.